Hello, my name is Matthew, and I read The Two Towers by Tolkien. A few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, I read The Hobbit, and it's a short, kind of like a children's story, and it's an adventure of Bilbo Baggins and Gandalf and the dwarfs setting off to find a treasure that's being looked over and protected by a gigantic dragon, and it's this adventure story. And it was enjoyable, much more um, interesting than maybe I was expecting. And I liked it enough, and I liked the Hobbits enough that I very fairly quickly went on and read the first book of the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, and the story blooms. It just grows into a much more expansive world. The landscape is larger. There's many more characters, and the stakes are higher. We learn more about the history of the people that populate this land, and the story continues after the story of the Hobbit. We had Bilbo during his adventure in his quest to find the dragon and the treasure. He acquires a ring. Years later, this ring has been passed on to Frodo, and it turns out this ring has a significant place in the fortunes of this world. It's a ring made by this evil being. There's all these other rings, and Gandalf says we need to take this ring to a magic mountain that has a magic volcano. We have to throw the ring in the magic pit, and Bilbo's the one that gets stuck with this quest, and he's the ring bearer. And off they go. There's a fellowship of the Fellowship of the Ring is formed. It's going to be an elf named Legolas, and a dwarf named Gimli, and Gandalf the wizard, and then there's I can't remember all their names. Aragorn. There's Strider. There's men and elves and dwarves and wizards, and off they go. And I was quite surprised by the ending of the Fellowship of the Ring. Of course, I was told very quickly that it's not a trilogy. I didn't read the first book of a trilogy. It was the Lord of the Rings was written as a whole, and then it was divided up. And very quickly, that division made a lot of sense to me. At the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, we have this whole cast of characters. This fellowship, really, like at their lowest point, they've gotten to like the bottom of like this mountain, and it's going to be an even more treacherous trek for wherever they have to go. And Frodo decides he can't risk the lives of all of these people. He's learned to care about their well-being, and just says that he's going to go off alone and deal with it on his own. And his good friend Sam Genji, another Hobbit. There's a couple Hobbits that are on this adventure. It's also Merry and Pippin, who in some ways serve as comic relief, but they're also just wonderful in their own right. So off Frodo and Sam go, and it's sort of the end of the story. And when the Two Towers picks up, they're nowhere to be found. Instead, we have the men. We have Legolas and Gimli stranded. All the hobbits are gone. They can't find Frodo or Sam. They know because there was a raid. These orcs raided this area. They know that Merry and Pippin had been kidnapped, and someone else had died, and they just don't know what to do. They know Frodo went in one direction, and the orcs captured the hobbits and went in another direction, and they're just left with this choice. Like, do they try to follow the ring, or they know there's like this army coming? Do they try to catch up and get the hobbits, Merry and Pippin? And they decide to go towards Merry and Pippin. And it's the first, I believe, it's the first point in the book where we leave Frodo. And for about half, it seems like half the book, or more than half the book, Frodo and Frodo's story is nowhere to be found. And we've spent all of this time with this character. He's been our eyepiece or peephole into this world, and we know that they're going into the most treacherous, dire trek, and they're just all alone, the most helpless of all of these beings that we've encountered. And off they go, and they come across a band of orcs and the riders of Rohan, and all this stuff. And then we also spend time on another branch with what was going on with Merry and Pippin. And even though they're in this like terrible situation, they are still very Hobbit-like, and so they're interested in their meals, and they kind of tell jokes and sing songs, and they know they're in a bad way, but they also can't help being relatively cheerful. They go into these scary woods, and they come across these creatures called Ents. These Ents are tree-like beings, talking trees, and there's something pretty impressive about getting involved in a book and then coming across a character that's a talking tree and being totally in on the story. I wanted to know more about these talking trees. I could spend more time with these talking trees, and they talk and think very slowly, which corresponds with the lifespan of a tree. A healthy, untouched tree, days and weeks, years, is insignificant to a tree that can be hundreds and hundreds of years old. And so they kind of see the world that way. Merry and Pippin had this big discovery of they all meet up again. So the elves and the dwarfs and the hobbits and the trees, they all find out that Gandalf is not dead. He's been revitalized or something, and now instead of being Gandalf the Grey, he's Gandalf the White, and he's even more powerful and wearing white. And we still don't know what's going on with Frodo or Sam, but the story escalates very quickly into a war. It turns into a war novel where they go somewhere else and they meet these other people, and they say that there's a disaster, there's another evil wizard, and he's mounting an army. He's got these goblins, these orcs, and there's treachery there, and lots of conflict. But eventually there's just an all-out war between one civilization, kind of the figureheads being our main characters, and then an army of these orcs being led by Saruman, who's the evil wizard. And my I think my biggest complaint, uh, or an issue that I had with the novel that felt uh, unsettling, was the treatment of the orcs. So through this world, we learn that there's all sorts of different people. There's elves that have an elf-like culture, and they have their own personalities and ways of doing things, and the dwarfs and the hobbits and wizards and men, and we get a really rounded idea of how these people live their lives, and uh, these different kinds of creatures, human-like creatures, um, border and conflict and bump up and have to interact with each other in different ways. The dwarfs and elves don't always get along, and the elves don't really like to pay attention or deal with the men. The hobbits are, in some ways, the most mythical beings, because throughout the book we find that people didn't even know that they existed, or thought that it was the stuff of fairy tales. But they all have personalities, and these orcs show up and serve as a big veil of an enemy. It's just an ant colony, this ant hill, vermin. And so when the war breaks out and we have Legolas and Gimli counting up their deaths, how many orcs they can kill. Legolas has a bow and arrow, and Gimli has a battle axe. And so throughout, they're kind of comically, like with a bravado, killing these orcs and shouting back and forth their tally. If you could imagine, Gimli is axing orcs to death, which would just be, it's the most violent thing you can imagine, being axed to death. He should just be covered in blood and this gruesome sight, and instead he's sort of swashbuckling through this war zone. Legolas is a little bit more, has distance with the bows and arrows, but they're just killing dozens and dozens of these creatures. And the way that the book kind of deals with that is it's that kind of face of the enemy. So today's standards, we might say it like they're just the Nazis, or like stormtroopers, faceless, nameless, evil creatures. And I don't really know how the book could get around it with being kind of high fantasy, with these issues of war being confronted, but it felt cheap to me. All of the other creatures that we meet, the talking trees have a distinct personality, but this race of orcs, these goblins, even the trolls, is a great example of kind of a dangerous, evil kind of creature that still felt very rounded, in a way that the orcs did not. But they all band together and they push off the orcs, and there's a confrontation with the evil wizard Saruman, where he's up on this window, and the hobbits and Gandalf and they're all there. And Saruman is, when he first has this introduction, he starts speaking, and he seems convincing. And there's a moment where you could at least understand if Gandalf was the villain. You could see how Saruman is like so close to just kind of nudging someone who might be on the fence about it and go, well, wait a minute here. What's going on? This kind of sly, uh, forked-tongued, uh, very well spoken, like convincing and articulate uh, evil wizard, and he's kind of casting a spell on these characters and the reader. And it's uh, brief and nuanced, but really well done and extremely effective um, for that air of villainy. And at some point, halfway through the book, more than halfway through the book, we finally get back to uh, Frodo and Sam Genji. And they're out alone. They're just getting lost, and their food supply is depleting, trying to keep their spirits up. They find out that Gollum, this other creepy creature who's kind of after the ring, and he's slimy and frog-like and insect-like, has just been kind of hunting them, tailing them throughout this whole entire story. At the very beginning, you have these very brief descriptions of maybe like a gray mass in the background or something that moves. And so you have Gollum kind of um, emerging through the story. And he's already known, he was in The Hobbit, and had his appearance with Bilbo. And finally, Gollum and Frodo and Sam come head to head, and they have a confrontation. A fight breaks out, and they manage to capture Gollum. And they find that he could serve to be useful. He knows the land. He knows where they're trying to go. They have something over him. Frodo has the ring. He knows that Gollum wants the ring. Sam is weary and as close to he comes throughout the whole book with not really being on Frodo's side. He wants to just kill him or chain him up and leave him to die. He's a bad omen. They decide, Frodo decides to keep him, and Sam is always there to support Frodo, no matter what. Just loyal through and through. They're the best friend you could have. And they go on, and things get worse and worse and worse, and they come up to one evil cliff and another evil hill and an evil valley, and they're in forests that are darker and creepier than the one before, and finally they have to go up this cliff that has a staircase carved into it, and it's just this nearly sheer cliff with a staircase that takes days to ascend. And at the very top of the staircase, there's going to be a tunnel that bores through the mountain. They're trying to get to the magic volcano to throw the ring in. And they go through, and it's blacker than it's ever been. It's just absolute darkness, and it's filled with a stench. And it's the smell of these orcs, and it's getting more and more foul, and it's totally pitch black, and Gollum is there, or maybe they can't find him, and earlier, I think in book 1, the elf princess, or this like beautiful, important elf, gave Frodo as a parting gift this vial of elf light, and so if you open it up, it beams with light. And they know that there's creatures, that there's something dangerous going on, and so they beam the light, and there's a gigantic spider, this huge, like a Macy's Day Parade balloon-sized spider, and it's going to attack Frodo. And as soon as Genji sees it, this is going on, Gollum attacks Sam, and he's blinding him and fighting him. Sam can't get to Frodo. He has to fend off Gollum. He has his own sword, and finally Gollum scrambles away. And Sam looks over and he sees this monster who's already spinning a web around Frodo. And Sam, from the very beginning of the book, made a promise to never leave Frodo's side. He'll be with him until the end. And for all of the wizards and elves and dwarfs and dragons and armies and all of those things, this book so far has succeeded in expressing the most amazing, true friendship. I'm not much for monsters or monster movies. Usually if a monster is getting attacked, I kind of feel more bad for the monster. And when you see Frodo getting spun up and Sam just wanting to save him, and he's a little hobbit. He's not a warrior or a great big soldier or anything physically imposing, and he doesn't care. It doesn't matter. That spider is spinning up his friend, and he goes after that spider, and he gets kicked off, and the spider sees that he's being attacked, and he gets a sword, and he's stabbing at the belly of the spider, and he can't penetrate the hard shell skin that the spider has, and he gets that elf sword, and with the spider's own weight, because Sam doesn't have the strength, the power to do any harm to this spider, but the spider's own weight, by pressing down onto Sam, the spider impales itself and shrieks and runs away, and Sam scrambles over to Frodo, who's cold and pallid. He's wrapped up. He's trying to cut him out, and Frodo is dead. He's lifeless, pulseless. And Sam is beside himself. He lost. He wasn't there. He wasn't able to save his friend, Mr. Frodo. He calls him Mr. Frodo from the very first time that we meet him. His good friend, Samwise Genji, and his good friend, Mr. Frodo Baggins, and was with him this whole time. Nearly drowned, starves, follows this creepy Gollum, fights off this spider, and he doesn't know what to do. And he says he has to finish the mission. That's what Gandalf said. The last one of us has to do this. And Sam is now all alone, away from the Shire. His whole life, his future, his friendship is gone. And he does it. He doesn't know what to do, but he takes the ring and carries on. And we come across a band of orcs. It's the first glimpse of these orcs having a personality that I kind of felt. It was still not very satisfying, but at least the orcs are having conversations. And he learns that Frodo is not dead. The spider injects its victims with a paralyzing agent, but the spider doesn't want to eat dead meat or drink dead blood. It just wants a limp body that it can drink and eat at its leisure. And so Sam is torn because he didn't know what to do, and he left him to carry on the mission, but he said he should have followed his heart instead of his mind. And he goes back. He's going to go back and save his friend, Mr. Frodo. It's amazing. I love it. I love it. That friendship, I can see just being the heartbeat, the pulse throughout this whole story. It's so effective, so well done. That's what I'll say for now. There's a lot of things going on in this book that I don't understand, but I'm loving it. So, thank you for watching, and leave a comment if you would like. Take care.